Demilitarization Africa are using the same slogan, Baraka, who organized a wonderful panel in Baltimore a few weeks ago on the AFRICOM and the militarization of Africa. He's going to talk about that. Thank you very much, sir, and it's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I greet you by saying once again, what is the universal objective of our people? And that is power to the people. Power to the people. That is the message, that is the objective that came out of the 1958 conference. That, in fact, is the objective that we have to fight for today. One of the things that we have to remind ourselves of is that no matter how much power a state has, that power can be reversed. The real source of power, therefore, has to be with the people. That is the message of 1958. That is the message of today. When we look at 1958, we are not looking back, as both of our presenters reminded us, just to talk about events in the past. But we understand that history is a site of struggle. History is a place where we contest the enemy. George Orwell had a very interesting quote. He said, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." I'll say it one more time. Who controls the past controls the future. And who controls the present controls the past. So those forces that are in place today attempt to justify their dominance and attempt to project themselves into the future by controlling how we see the past. Our responsibility as people struggling for liberation is to tell our own story, to decolonize that history, to capture that history for ourselves and give it our interpretation. So we say that we have a history of struggle, a history of fighting back. We've heard that history twice already. I'm not going to repeat parts of that. I'm only going to suggest, my brothers and sisters, that one of the themes that's been consistent in our struggles has been that our struggles have been international. International among ourselves, and international in the context of being connected to the oppressed people around the world. They're part of what defines our movement has in fact been that internationalism. And that is the part of our struggle that we have to recapture. That, I think, is one of the objectives of our gathering today, to talk about that international perspective, to remind ourselves that we are not only involved in struggle here in this country, but our struggles have always been interconnected fundamentally with African people around the world, and connected fundamentally with all those who are oppressed and struggling for liberation against one common enemy. One common enemy that links all of us together. We name that enemy. We say that enemy is the white supremacist, colonial, capitalist patriarchy. We name the enemy so that we're not confused about what we need to be doing. So we're not confused about what the real objective should be. When you understand that we're up against an enemy that is structured, that is committed to maintaining its dominance globally, then you won't be confused by efforts to suggest to us that we can reform the structures, that we can make some little changes, that all we got to do is get rid of the trunk and bring in a Democrat, and everything will be all right. When you're clear about who you are, when you're clear about your enemy, then you understand your responsibility. And you understand your responsibility is not to reform this thing, but to destroy it, to transform it, to build something different, because we can be different. And in the process of us changing ourselves, we also change the system. Not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. So the message of 1958 is a message of struggle. It is a message of returning to the source, as our dear brother Amilcar Cabral frames it. That as important as state power can be, and it is, the real source and most consistent source of power is in fact the people. So one of the things we have to do to try to intensify the struggle that we are involved in globally is to make sure that we strengthen the people, make sure we're clear about what we have to fight against, and to be vigilant against those new forms of oppression and exploitation. And one of the major challenges we have today when it comes to African people, when it comes to the African continent, is what we see now 60 years after 1958. And that is a new scramble for Africa. A new scramble to try to control the destiny of our continent. And one of the major negative forces in this new struggle for Africa is, in fact, the United States of America. Now, what that means, my friends, is that if the U.S. is involved in attempting to recolonize Africa using military means, and that main method of means it is using is, in fact, the New Africa Command. When we talk about recolonize, let's make sure we're clear, though. Because, as we all know, Africa has never been completely decolonized. The Europeans have never left. Kwame Nkrumah reminded us in 1965 that neo-colonialism was the highest stage of imperialism. That was true then, and it's true today. That basically the forms of oppression change, but in qualitative terms, the same kinds of relationships still exist. Okay? So the U.S. never left Africa. But today, because of the relative space that some of these states have on the African continent, and their ability to leverage their space by connecting up with other powerful states in the world, like the Chinese, what we have today now is the perception on the part of the U.S. that it needs to step in and to make sure that the Chinese don't make more inroads into the African continent. That is the spirit of internationalism. That is the spirit of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. The struggle for African liberation continues. And the target is not only the African continent, but all of the African spaces that now exist as a consequence of colonization, as a consequence of the slave trade. Now we have African people literally all over the world. We have 150 million Africans in the so-called Americas. So our responsibility is to make these links, to build more powerful oppositional structures, to recognize that our objective is not to reform, but to make revolution. That is the lesson of 1958. That is the lesson we have to relearn today. that our responsibility is to struggle, to stay clear, and to, in fact, make revolution. That is the spirit of internationalism that we acknowledge, and it's important to acknowledge that as we are looking at the anniversary of our dear brother Malcolm X's assassination. That is the spirit that's always animated our struggles here in this country. Now, we say that we are not only concerned about what is happening on the African continent, we understand that the kind of militarism we are fighting against is also linked to the militarism that directly impacts us in this country. We want to oppose the war and death and militarism in Africa. But we have to recognize and understand that militarism in Africa, AFRICOM on the African continent, is the flip side of the same imperialist coin. On the other side of that coin is the 1033 program in the US. It is the domestic military that we call the police. So we're not talking about just having our focus externally. Part of our internationalist perspective, our internationalist consciousness, is understanding those fundamental connections. That we have a fight that is external and internal. So my brothers and sisters, we have a task, a responsibility. It is to not only save ourselves, but also to save humanity. To recognize that we have the power to transform this society and in fact to transform the world. The only thing that we have to do is make a commitment to in fact do that. We're on the right side of history. We understand that. We know that. Now all we have to do is organize ourselves and get on the right side of the fight. Thank you.